What is going on, guys, and welcome back to Hunter Talk. This is our second discussion on the channel, and I want to start by introducing this man with a little story, a little background story. Here we go. We're flashback into grade 4, where I just moved from Brampton to Woodbridge, and we were in the portables. I just went outside. I only had like one friend because I played soccer in Woodbridge before I moved to Brampton, and out of the left side of the portables, I hear, I should say, the voice of Joe Bowen. For anyone that knows, is the voice of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I'm like, is he dropping off one of his grandkids or something? I kind of like freaked out a bit. And I see this guy calling play-by-play a foot hockey game. And I knew right then and there, that guy, I wanted him in my life. And he has been there. We actually lived on the same street. We didn't even know about it. We lived on the same street. And we've been friends ever since. Mr. Alex Florio, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm happy to be on.
And if you want to talk Maple Leafs, this is your guy, because he can probably name you what size Austin Matthews underwear is. But enough. Let's go into the big topic that hurt a lot of fans. If you ask me, hurt a lot of fans. The NHL Lockout, precisely the 04-05 one and the 12-13, even though that was a half a season one. Mr. Florio, I'm going to ask you the first question. As a fan, how did you handle the NHL lockouts?
Well, I could tell you in 04 when it happened.
We were in grade 8, by the way.
Yeah, grade 8. And I could tell you I did my grade 8 speech on the lockout.
Oh, man.
So it hit me pretty hard. At the time, I didn't think it was real. I didn't think, how can they actually do this to a fan? And I was thinking about it more as a fan and not as a business. So in my mind, I thought, this is not going to happen. There's no way it's going to happen. And then sure enough, it happened. So it sucked. There was, like you said in your intro, being a diehard Leaf fan, there was no Leafs every night. And it was, what do? There was nothing I could watch. And obviously I like the Jays. I love the Raptors. I love the Jays. I'm still a big Toronto sports fan overall, but to me, the Leafs are king.
Of course.
And so I love watching the Jays. I love watching the Raptors, but to me, the Leafs are number one. So to not have them on every other night, it was tough.
100% agree with that statement, because you know what? I still remember our grade 8 year with Mr. Richard Doria. If you're out there watching, hey, sir, how are you? It was crazy just not talking about hockey. And he was a big hockey guy as well. And we couldn't talk about anything. And the only thing we only had was, okay, Brother's the best goalie. We'd make fun of that because one of our friends was a diehard Brother fan. And that's pretty much it. And pretty much the Leafs being at the state that they were actually good. They were good. We went to the semis that year in the conference. Unfortunately, Philly happened. Injuries to our goaltending, I believe. And just our core was getting old, and that's it. But you know what? The lockout came at a really bad time, because that's when the league really started to change, if you ask me, right? Because after that, they introduced the shootout, so players had to get faster. So guys like Gary Roberts and Joe Nieuwendyk were starting to, slow their roll, and they couldn't play in this new tempo league, right? So, and the next question I want to ask you is, what teams do you think were really affected by the NHL lockout?
Well, I'll tell you something. At the time, when I started hearing talks about a salary cap, and when I started to understand more and more what that meant, I knew right away that wasn't going to be good for the Leafs. The Leafs are big spenders, and if you're going to put a cap on how much they can spend, and I knew that wasn't going to mean good news for the Leafs. And I'll tell you, I remember vaguely, or no, actually I lied. I remember crystal clear. Once the lockout finished and free agency happened, I remember Gary Roberts and Joe Nieuwendyk both signed with Florida. And when I saw that, my first thought was, this is it. It's done. We're doomed. Now, little did I know that the Leafs would be horrible for the next decade. But I remember thinking, honestly, once Gary Roberts signed with Florida, once Joe Nieuwendyk signed with Florida, Ty Domi, I believe, ended up in Pittsburgh. So you started to see the team start to chip away, and all of these guys who you loved no longer with the team. It sucked. And I still even remember Darcy Tucker, who, he's my all-time favorite player. And when he signed with Colorado, I was like, what's going on here? So, yeah, it sucked. And especially it sucked for those big spending teams like Toronto, Detroit, New York, even, as much as I hate them, Montreal, they're another big spending team. So it certainly hurt those.
Yep, now you're back. Yep. So, anyways, yeah, sorry we had a little bit of a technical delay there, but it happens when you're recording. Anyways, so yeah, you're absolutely right. Like teams like Montreal, the last thing you were talking about, and then you cut off, definitely felt the pain because you know what? Everybody wants to go to an original six team, and pre-cap, those guys were going there, and it was crazy. I remember the 05, what was the 03, 04 trade deadline. I was in the basement helping my dad, and I was hearing names coming to Toronto. It was nuts. But now it's like everything changed dramatically when the cap got installed into the league, unfortunately. But you know what? Flash forward season 12 and 13, 2012 and 2013, of course. Another lockout and another, like, what's going on? You got Gary Bettman at the helm, and, everybody hates Bettman. Let's just put it out there. If you're new to watching the NHL, the man that you will always hate and hear booed is Gary Bettman. And he did it again in that year, but it was a half a season one. So the thing that I always wanted to ask a more, let's call you professional fan, right? Because you watch more than me, obviously. How do you feel like that lockout affected the league? Because that was just a half season one, right?
Well, the first thing I want to say is going back quickly to 04 was, as much as the lockout hurt teams like we just talked about, like Toronto, the Rangers, Montreal, those big spending, the big boys, Detroit, it was certainly a good thing for little teams like Carolina, Nashville.
No, Carolina, did they not win the cup after that?
That's what I mean, right? So, I guess, in hindsight, as a Leaf fan, it sucked. But if you're a big fan of those smaller teams, it was amazing. But now to jump ahead to the second lockout in 2013, I think I was a little bit more optimistic. It didn't seem that there was as much of a hatred or as much bumping heads between the two sides this time around. So I was a little bit more confident that things were going to get better and things were going to improve. So I wasn't, when they announced that the season was coming back, I think it was in December, maybe even early January when they announced this. I was pretty excited, but I wasn't overly shocked at the same time. But for me, just to get hockey back was...
Yeah, and it was just a little bit weird too, like 48 games and then the playoffs started out of nowhere. So let's not even talk about what happened in those playoffs for the Leafs.
That half a season, though, did nothing but good for the Leafs.
Oh, yeah.
The Leafs were a team at the time where, not much expectations. They had a couple guys. They had Kessel leading the way, who I will always defend, by the way. I'll always be a Kessel defender. They had Phaneuf, who I will also always defend as well. So they had a couple of guys who were, doing all right, but I don't think anybody had them as a playoff team. And then sure enough, I think the half season did more good for them than anything else. So it's funny how, the first time around, the lockout did nothing but bad for the Leafs. And then the second time around, I think you can argue that it helped the Leafs.
For sure.
So it wasn't as bad. I don't think there was as much hatred or as bad blood between two sides the second time around. And like I said, I was just happy hockey was back.
And I'm happy you touched up on the Phaneuf and Kessel thing just to put minds at ease. I also think that the introduction of the salary cap made it really look at a player differently, right? Because before, if a player had a poor season, okay, whatever, it was a bad season. But now, when you're the captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs and you got a $6+ million contract and you have a bad season, hello, people start to criticize you a lot more. And I think that's what led to the demise of Phaneuf in Toronto, right? So the cap also put that into perspective for fans. Before, nobody really cared about how much they were making. But then it came out to like, okay, for example, if Austin Matthews, knock on wood, underperforms next year, that's $12 million a year. People are gonna jump the ship on Austin Matthews. Maybe not as crucial as they did with Phaneuf, but with they'll look at him in a different perspective, right? So the next question I want to ask, even though it's not a lockout and it sucks what's going on in the world right now, with the COVID-19 shutting down leagues across North America and in Europe. Do you think, this is more of a hockey question, not a lockout question, but do you think teams that were riding those momentum waves are going to hit a brick wall and just collapse now? Or do you think if we pray it comes back and obviously this ends, do you think once the league starts up again, these teams are going to pick up right back where they were? Because obviously you got to look at the season as injuries. If a guy was out for a week, now you're getting him back. So all those teams that had injuries, and I could talk about the Leafs again, we had a couple of defensemen out, and I think now they're ready to go, right? So how do you think that this is affecting the league as well?
First off, back to FNUF real quick.
Yeah, no problem. Always love a FNUF story.
I woke up that morning and got traded to the Leafs to a message from you saying FNUF got traded to the Leafs. So you were the first person to notify me on that.
And we watched the conference on my computer outside of my house.
So kudos to you for that. But no, I think with what's going on right now, I want to break it into three categories. So I think there's the section where COVID-19 sucks for some teams, where it might benefit some teams, and then there's kind of the bubble teams. So I think the teams that it's going to really hurt the most, where it's going to be bad, is I look at teams like Dallas. Dallas is a sneaky good team. They got a real good core. They got a good team, good goalie. They have some really good, quiet, sneaky defensemen that a lot of people don't talk about. And if these guys were playing in Toronto or Montreal, that's all you would ever hear is their names. So Dallas is a team that I've been watching all season long. They're sneaky good. And I think they were riding such a hot wave of momentum that this could possibly hurt them. Another team, even, I know you talked about them earlier a little bit before, was the Rangers. The Rangers are still a young team. They're rebuilding, I guess you could say, but they were playing unreal hockey. And if it was not for this, a lot of people thought they might actually squeak in and push a few teams out. So, that's another team that's going to be hurt by this. And then even a team like Nashville. Nashville, I look at it as a team similar to Toronto, where lots of expectations this season. They had a good offseason. They made some big moves. And, they brought in people like Duchesne, and they just haven't lived up to their expectations. Like as of right now, Nashville's sitting in 8th spot in the West. But, the fact is they were outside of the playoffs for so long. Now they're in. So I think they were on a bit of a hot wave or a hot streak, and this is going to hurt them a little bit. Now, teams where I think it's good are teams like Toronto, Vancouver, even Arizona. And I say that because, and I'll start obviously with Toronto. Toronto hasn't had a good season, in my opinion. They've been so inconsistent. And yeah, if you look at the standings,
and the injury bug has caught them as well, right? Jake Muzzin has had a really bad on and off season. So
they've had a ton of injuries. You're right, but at the end of the day, you got to look at, and I think this is to the fault of Dubas, but at the end of the day, he handed out 4 big contracts. None of these 4 big guys took any sort of discount to be in Toronto. And they really, they haven't lived up to their expectations. I think, a guy like Austin Matthews had an unbelievable season, so you can kind of, you might not want to include him in that, but I don't think Marner's had a very good season. I think Nylander's had a really good season, but I don't think Tavares has had a very good season.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, losing a guy like Riley, it hurts. So, I think Toronto, this could potentially benefit from this because the time away from the game, not only will their injured guys start to heal, guys like Jake Muzzin, Ilya Mikheyev, these guys are going to get healthier. And that goes for the rest of the league. All the injured guys across the league are going to get better, and it's going to only benefit them. But, even a guy like Freddie Anderson, a lot of people question how many games he could play in a season and whether or not that affects his performance in the playoffs. Well, I think this break could be good for him. So I think Toronto could actually be a team that benefits from this break. Now, what I will say is, though, how they handle this break will determine that. If they look in the mirror and say, we've had an opportunity and we haven't really lived up to it, I think they can come back strong. So we'll see. Hopefully I'm right.
Well, that's but even the thing, another right?
team, I think another team that this could benefit is a team like Vancouver. Vancouver's had another, really good season, I guess, for their standards.
And they put together a really good young team. I really enjoy
nice team.
the Vancouver team right now.
Yeah.
They're playing good hockey.
Their goalie Markstrom has been, he could potentially win the Vezina this season. He's been incredible.
Oh yeah.
So we'll see what happens there. But I mean, before this all happened, he was injured. So this is nothing but good for them. So Vancouver right now is probably thanking God that well, no, obviously not. But I mean, they're probably grateful for the break for him.
Oh, for sure. A lot of teams want their injured players back because, it all comes down to that cup, right? The most prestigious cup in sports, if you ask me. And you're absolutely right. Teams like Vancouver, teams like Toronto, that this team is dying. After seeing the Raptors parade last year, guys, we gotta get the Buds in that Stanley Cup contention. So hopefully, management shakeup at the beginning of the season for the Leafs was a wake up call, and hopefully that now that the core will reconnect and this little bit of time off, you hear about all the players talking to each other. Maybe that will be also a wake up call for them. Correct?
I want to, for sure. I hope so. But I want to talk about two things. With one in particular with the Leafs that I think was really important for them, and I think one of the most important things they did this season was go out and get a guy like Kyle Clifford. Now, from the
fun
start
fact.
of the season,
Sorry to cut you off. Fun fact. I go to the Maple Leafs game about a month ago, and I go with the gentleman that I interviewed last week, Rocco. Because he gets tickets because he works in construction, so people give him tickets. All of a sudden, he has a bad knee, so they put us in that line for disabled / VIPs. And I see this lady in front of me with 3 little kids wearing all a Clifford jersey. And I look at her head. Kyle, if you ever watched this video, good for you, because she was wearing a rock, man, the size that my wife would leave me for. And it was his wife and kids. So I thought that was a little cool story that you just had to mention Kyle Clifford there. But go ahead, continue. Sorry.
Oh, no, I just think that now, look, I've been saying it all season long that the Leafs need to do something about the backup position. And I love Jack Campbell. I think that's a good pickup. From what
he played good those couple of weeks.
He's been incredible. And I think you could see the team playing in front of him differently. I think when it was Hutchinson and that, you see the team, they look a little bit more nervous. They look like they're holding onto their sticks tighter. And, I feel for the guy, I really do, but he just couldn't handle it. But I look at a guy like Campbell who came in and he started playing really well. And I think the team had started playing with more and more confidence in front of him. So I think that's good. But I think with Clifford in particular, one of the things I've said all season long, and you can ask anyone, is this team, I love the skill that they have. I love the speed, but they don't have any kind of heart. They don't have any grit, and they need that. And I think, I think losing Kadri really hurt them. I think Kadri, I love Kadri. I will always defend Kadri, and I hated that trade when I saw it happen. And I certainly miss having Kadri, but I think a guy like Clifford coming in, somebody who plays with that kind of, jam, he hits, he skates well, he fights, but he's also won cups. And I think that's the most important thing is he's won the cups. He knows how to get it done. And I think that was a big pickup for the Leafs. And I hope they can find a way to bring him back. But, there's one team that I want to talk about that, I was dead wrong with them. And just really quick, I want to throw them out
go
there.
for it. No worries.
The Columbus Blue Jackets at the start of the season.
One of my favorite coaches.
You know what? Torts can win the Jack Adams, the Coach of the Year award this year if Columbus keeps it up. Columbus lost everybody in the offseason. They lost Panarin. They lost Bobrovsky. They lost Duchesne. They lost everyone. And they right now are in a playoff spot. I thought they were going to be a bottom feeder team down there with Ottawa and Detroit. But to my surprise, got to give these guys credit. They just work hard every game. And so,
Well, that's the thing, too. You know what? To me, obviously soccer is more of my bread and butter. But you know what? It's kind of the same thing. If you have a strong leader at the helm, players will start to definitely listen a little more, right? So, for example, I can use my favorite team, Inter. They brought in a 12 million euro coach in Antonio Conte. But guess what? Those players that last year were not playing good, he's squeezing every good ounce out of them, right? So Torts is that kind of coach, if you ask me. He doesn't care what people say about him. Yeah, sure, his interviews might be a little backwards, but guess what? His results are always there. So I think he's doing a fantastic job. To be honest, if there was ever the chance of him coming to Toronto, I think that would be the guy that could potentially bring a Stanley Cup to this city.
Well, you know what? People say that he's a hard ass and that, some
But you
people
need that,
hate
right?
him. But, on the other side or on the flip side of that, I've seen interviews from players in the past who have said they would, go through a brick wall for this guy. So, yeah, he might be a bit of a hard ass, but if he's going to if he's going to be able to squeeze, like you said, every ounce out of you and motivate you to kind of go out there and
look at the core they have now, right? Who would you really say that is pushing as, like, who do you, like, realistically, Columbus, when you think Columbus, their best player right now is?
I think Seth Jones for sure, the defenseman.
And would you ever have suspected that at the beginning of the season? Especially he got traded a couple of years ago from Nashville to them.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the thing with Torts. He doesn't give up on players. If he has them there, he squeezes every ounce of talent that player has out of them. And at the end of the season, then you rest. That's the mentality. That's the way it should be.
I think a guy like Torts, and I think, I look at, when I think of Columbus, to me, when I think of Columbus, I think of meat and potatoes. Like they're just a hard-working team. They're a bunch of just guys who work hard. None of them are flashy. Like, they don't have a lot of skill. They really don't. When you look at their players like Foligno, or now they added Gustav Nyquist in the summer. Like, yeah, these are good players, but they're not like overly skilled guys.
Yeah, they're not game changers.
No,
right?
And I think they're a team that kind of thrives on that. I think a lot of people talked about how Columbus would be a terrible team and how they have no expectations. So I think they thrive on it. And I think a guy like Torts thrives on that kind of, you have no expectations for us. Like, we're going to go out here and surprise you.
Exactly. And the only thing I would point out to that, it's kind of like the people around the NBA when Kawhi did not choose to re-sign in Toronto. Everybody kind of gave the Raptors as, okay, the one-trick pony is done. Let's bring it to the pasture and put it out of its misery. But guess what? Ibaka shows up, becomes the leader. Kyle Lowry is the veteran leader presence. It's a good team still. But the thing is, Nick Nurse, like Tort, very unethical in his interviews. And sure, everybody knows him for that mouth-opening meme that goes, exactly. And that's the thing, right? Like, he squeezes the talent of these players. And the Raptors are what? They were riding a wave that only Milwaukee could stop, if you ask me, in this division.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the Raptors ahead of the Clippers right now in the standings?
Yeah, I believe you're right. I could be wrong, guys. Don't chew me up. Like I said, I'm not a big NBA guy, but I think you are right. The Raptors are playing better and spend a lot less than the Clippers did. But let me get you here with that final question. There's some articles that I read a couple of weeks ago on The Score and also on Bleacher stating that the NHL union is looking at the other leagues like the NBA, the NFL, the MLS even, I would say, and noticing that these players are just making outrageous money. Steph Curry, $40.2 million to play basketball, and he sat, pardon my French, his ass on the bench all year with an injury. So do we have the cloud of another meeting perhaps and another, I don't want to say the word lockout, on our hands? And you, obviously, I trust your word the most out of everybody I know in the hockey industry. Do you think that Bettman is the right guy to hold these meetings again? Or do you think that the NHL now should just look at it and be like, okay, I think you've done your damage, thank you? Because this man has 3 lockouts under his name, right? 94, 95, we were heading for a lockout as well. And just at the end, they caught it, right? So what do you think on that one?
Well, I think you're going to be shocked by my answer, but I've grown to like Gary Bettman the last
Whoa, okay. Now you caught my attention.
As much as I couldn't stand the guy in 04 because of what he was doing to my beloved Leafs, I think, now this is me speaking as just a hockey fan, not a Leaf fan, but as a hockey fan, I think everything he's done for the game has been amazing. I think, hockey has grown, and you can't argue it. Like, you look at the numbers, the sport of hockey has grown like crazy across the world or throughout the world because of a guy like Bettman. So I think, you got to give credit where credit is due.
For sure.
Now, obviously, the lockouts under his belt doesn't help him. But I mean, I also look at teams that, I think you can argue. Oh, are you losing me right now?
No, I'm good. Got you.
Okay. Sorry, I thought we were cutting off.
No worries. No, we're good.
I think, you look at teams that, I think you can make the argument that does Carolina deserve to have a team right now, or does Arizona deserve to have a team right now, or is Seattle the smartest place to bring a team? I don't know. Now, clearly they went to these cities for a reason, but I think you got to give Bettman some kind of credit, and I don't think that it's necessarily all on him. And I want to give you an example where he got a lot of hate, and a lot of people kind of crapped on him. But I also see his point of view was even with the last Olympics, not sending NHL players to the Olympics. I know a lot of people hated him on that, but I get it. And I'll give you an example. In 2016, when John Tavares was still with the Islanders, our boy Johnny T, he went over to go play for Canada and broke his leg. And that was it. The Islanders lost their captain. And so I couldn't even imagine if Austin Matthews went to go play for the U.S. and then, broke his leg, and then that's it. Leafs, he's not playing. So I think, I don't love everything Bettman does, but I certainly don't hate him. And I certainly have grown to kind of see.
He definitely sees the business side of it, right? Because for us, we just care about hockey, right? The game being played. But he clearly sees the vision of the business portion of it. So you're saying, if I'm understanding, you would want him at the helm to talk to the NHLPA.
And I don't think we're heading down the road for another lockout anytime soon, at least.
I'm pretty sure if you get, this is my personal opinion though, right? Sorry I cut you off, but I'm pretty sure if you get 10 or even 20 NHL players right now and say, hey, listen, you put your body through this, and this is what an NBA player does, and he's getting paid almost triple your salary. How do you feel about it? I don't think they're happy, because at the end of the day, they are superstars just as much as the next NBA player, right? To me, you can mention LeBron James, for example. Definitely, hands down, one of the greatest to ever play. But you know what? We got a guy like Connor McDavid in the NHL right now that potentially could be the next Gretzky. But at the same time, you look at the money that they're making, it's just nuts. But you flash back to those 80s where Gretzky was making what he was making. Magic Johnson was making just the same money. And that's why it's like you look at it as a business portion as well. And if I'm Connor McDavid, I'm putting my body through hell. I've played a couple of games of pickup, I'm not going to lie, and it's tough. It's enduring. Like, it's the toughest sport to play for sure, next to the NFL, I think. But at the same time, you know what? Your body goes through an extreme season. And it's like, okay, I'm doing all this, and half the league doesn't even crack the 6 million mark. And it's like, okay, I can see why the NHLPA might want to revisit this with the league. Maybe the cap goes up and guys can make a little more, those big name players, right? Because at the end of the day, yeah, you can look at their endorsements. That's another conversation for another day. But at the same time, it's like, okay, this is what's happening in the world of sports. And not to bash my beloved soccer, but 90 minutes of soccer is not even comparable to 60 minutes of hockey, because it's just so high tense. And when you're on the ice for those 2 minutes, it's 2 minutes of go, 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 go. Meanwhile, in soccer, if you're having a bad day, you're kind of walking at the front of the line there. But that's my opinion. I think if the NHL does revisit it, hopefully we can figure it out quicker, you would say?
Well, I think the one thing that they have to look at, players at least, is the NBA, leagues like the NBA, the MLB, they generate a lot more revenue than the NHL does. The NHL is still, out of the four major North American sports, and so in that four, I have the NBA, the MLB, the NFL, and the NHL. Out of those four, the NHL is sort of the baby out of the four of them. They're still the ones, they're not as big as those four leagues. They don't get as much revenue as those four leagues, or those other three leagues, I should say. I get the argument, but I think, I also think hockey players are kind of a different breed. I think of somebody like, you can look at Connor McDavid, for example. Connor McDavid, he's getting $12.5 million a season, which, is a nice little payday.
Of course.
But he actually, believe it or not, took less money than he could have gotten. And, he took less money because he wanted Edmonton to be in a position where they can go out and spend some money on free agents. So, he did that. And even look at John Tavares. When John Tavares signed with the Leafs, he had three offers that he could have picked from. And his offers were the $11 million a season from Toronto. He got offered $12.5 million from the Islanders, and he got offered 13 from San Jose. San Jose, he could have gone down there. He could have made $13 million a year. He could have lived a private life. Not a person would know who he is. He would be able to live down there with his wife, his baby, and no one would recognize him. No one would bother him. But he wanted to come home. So I think hockey play, and he took the discount to come home.
Yeah.
So I think hockey players are a little bit different. Now, when you look at the Leafs, you can say, well, Austin Matthews, Marner, these guys didn't take any discounts to stay in Toronto, and that's true. But, I think at the end of the day, regardless of which sport it is, the elite guys are going to get paid, and that's kind of that. And it's funny, when you actually look at how the NHL works with their structure of salary and everything, a lesser, I don't want to say a crappy player in the NHL, but, a fourth line NHL player who plays 4 minutes a night gets paid more than, the backup wide receiver on the Cincinnati Bengals. So, think about it like that too, right? So even though, like you said, Steph Curry's getting paid $40 million a season or something obscene like that.
$40.2 million this year.
Yeah,
and the highest NHL contract this year is Mr. Austin Matthews at 15.9. So that's not even half.
See, the Leafs, though, are smart the way that they do these contracts because, this is where the Leafs can still take advantage of their big bank accounts and their big wallets. What they do to sort of minimize the blow on the salary cap for them is they pay out all of these guys in signing bonuses. So if you look at somebody like, I don't know, let's think about Patrick Marleau. When Patrick Marleau was with the Leafs, he signed his 3-year deal. It was $6.25 million a season, but his actual salary was something like $800,000. He made the rest of his money on signing bonuses. So, hey, Patrick, you play one game with the Leafs this season, you're going to get $4 million in the bank. So, the Leafs could still take advantage of that and still use that financial muscle that they have that, a team like Carolina can't.
Yep, I agree. I definitely see it. But you know what? Last thing I want to touch up on here is, when it comes to it, I can see where you're coming from, that the league does evenly distribute their contracts, because you're right. The backup for the Maple Leafs is making what? I think it's around the one-ish mark.
It's like 1.5.
And it's like the backup to the running back of whatever team in the NFL you want to touch up doesn't even crack the 1 million. So you're absolutely right. I think the NHL structurally gives out really good contracts. But at the end of the day, I think that a lot of these players are going to start seeing it anyways. This is just me thinking about it now because the article that I read really makes you think about it. But I can definitely see it being that the players could potentially be like, okay, you know what? The league's making good money. The NHL is growing, obviously, into the European market as well. Because, hey, last junior world tournament we had, there was like a lot of upsets, if I'm not wrong, correct? Like teams that you would not think being good are starting to become good. So obviously hockey is growing in all these places. So if it keeps growing, I could potentially see that the NHLPA does have to sit down again. Maybe not talk the word lockout, but maybe for sure the cap will have to go up. And you could start seeing maybe like, not in this contract, but maybe in the next one, whoever wants the Connor McDavid name, they're going to probably have to pay 15 to 20.
Well, what's unfortunate is right now, I could be wrong. I know I'm in the ballpark, but I believe the salary cap right now for the NHL is around 81.5 million. Now, there was talks before all of this happened that the salary cap for next season was going to go up to potentially 88.5 million,
Yep.
which would be a huge increase.
Oh yeah,
That's
because
just massive.
that's giving teams that right now need that one more player, but are really like kind of belt tighten. Sorry, and for example, I use the Leafs. If the Leafs get
Yeah.
that extra 6 or 7 million space, guess what? They can finally add that top defenseman that's needed.
Well, I look at it even, look at if, and this, I don't hate Kyle Dubas. I think he's done a good job. But I think, that part of my criticism of Kyle Dubas is if he had gotten Marner to take 200,000 less, Matthews to take 400,000 less, Nylander to take 300,000 less, that's over $1 million right there that they'd have in cap space. Where, at the beginning of the year, they were paying Hutchinson $700,000 and they couldn't add anybody else. They had like zero cap space. So imagine what that $1 million could have done for them. They could have added a quality backup goalie at the beginning of the year who could have won them some games. And right now they'd be in a comfier position. So, I think you have to look at it like that. But, I look at, and I want to go back to somebody like Connor McDavid. So Connor McDavid making $12.5 million a year is insane. But when you think about the way that he's getting paid and his salary going with the percentage of the cap, so right now I believe, and again, I could be wrong on this, but basically a player can't be making more than, I think, 18% of the salary cap. So somebody like Sidney Crosby, you might look at him and say, wow, he's arguably the best player in the last decade, and he's only getting paid $8.5 million. How can that be? But what people need to recognize is when he signed that contract, the salary cap was maybe 60 million.
Yep.
And
around 67, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, around there. And his salary at the time was 20% of the salary cap. So
that's
somebody
one
like
player,
Connor McDavid,
right?
Sorry?
That's one player out of a roster of what, 20 to 30? That's insane.
And so Connor McDavid, who's getting paid $12.5 million, he's actually still only earning like 17% of the salary cap. So he actually right now, technically, now he doesn't obviously earn less money Crosby's earning less money than McDavid. But Crosby, if he had signed his contract when McDavid signed his, Crosby would actually be making more money. So it's just kind of funny how all that works.
Yep. Well, you know what? Definitely discussion. Yeah, now we're back. Yeah, you kind of froze there for a second. But, and again, right now, actually, there you're back. But you know what? I think this has been a really good discussion. And obviously, it opened up the eyes of some of the followers that did ask me, honestly, when I had mentioned it to a couple of friends that I'd be doing a segment on the NHL Lockout. It kind of gave them a bit of the shivers because nobody ever likes that to talk about that stuff. But I knew that you would enjoy it. So thank you so much for coming on Hunter Talk. And honestly, I'd love to get you back if the season picks up and when it ends, just to see your input for the Toronto Maple Leafs run in these playoffs. So thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys. Subscribe if you're new here. Like the video. And make sure to leave some comments if you want us to talk more hockey. If you want Alex back, we'll for sure get him back. It's not that hard. He literally lives down the street. So, or used to anyways. Now I'm in Pickering. God knows why. But thank you. Still down the street technically. Because I always go by my parents' house. Can't do anything about it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it once again.
Yes, sir. I'm going to make a quick bold statement before I go. Once the season picked up again, Leafs Tampa first round, Leafs in 6.
So now when the season ends, I want you back just to get your input on who's going to be the horse pulling the carriage kind of player. And I definitely want your opinion on the playoffs. Hopefully they're all happy because we need a cup here in Toronto. So thank you guys, and have yourself a wonderful night.